Nehemiah chapter 5. And we'll just jump right into the first verse here. It'll behave itself. Let's see. Huh. Well, it was working. Let me see. She had a bike accident today and broke her hand, and her leg is messed up. And
yeah, her right.
wow. Well, I don't know what's going on. Let's see.
She broke her yeah. So I said it's not surprised they haven't pull it together.
There we go. All right. Verse 1. Now there was a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brothers. Big outcry among the Jews themselves. Not, we know we've been hissing and doing Sanballat and Tobiah, but that's not what the problem is. The problem is from within. Okay, and the people are just arguing with each other, fighting with each other. Got a problem. Nehemiah 4 ended with really high hopes. If you remember, they had gotten half the wall completed, or at least the wall completed to half its height. It had been completed all the way around. They had come up with ways to protect themselves from their enemies. They were working with a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other, and you know, things were moving along pretty well. Things were going well. And then all of a sudden, Nehemiah 5 starts with bad news, and it appears that it's so bad that it looked, from all indications, the work on the work on the walls had stopped. And the funny thing was, it wasn't the enemies who were responsible; it was the people who were responsible. And there was strife, and the problem was they were no longer unified. There was strife, bickering, complaining, fingers of accusation pointed at one another, and it just caused the work to come to a halt. And really, throughout history, when God's people fight one another instead of fighting the real enemy, God's work does not get done. And you know, a church that's bickering and complaining over little things, that the good works just cease. And it's a shame that happens, but it does. All right, let's look at the next few verses. For there were those who said, "We, our sons and our daughters, are many. Therefore, let us get grain that we may eat and live." There were others who said, "We are mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses that we might get grain because of the famine." Yeah, we're getting a little more information here. Also, there were those who said, "We have borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards. Now our flesh is like the flesh of our brothers, our children, and like their children. Yet behold, we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters are forced into bondage already. And we are helpless because our fields and our vineyards belong to others." So in these 4 verses right here, we find a lot of information that we didn't have in the first verse. We just saw in the first verse that there was confusion and bickering and turmoil and strife. Now we see what the problems are. And there's several problems listed in here. Let's go over some of it. There were money problems, and money problems were affecting the building project. But it wasn't the cost of construction that was the problem. because the costs of construction had already been taken care of. The king of Persia had provided everything, and even sent some of his own men along with Nehemiah to see that the job could be accomplished. So, if you remember, Asaph, who was in charge of all the timber and everything, was told just give them all the timber they need to complete this job, and other materials too. So the money problem was not a construction money problem. The problem was this famine. And the impact of the famine was very much like today's inflation, in that food was in short supply and it was costly. And that creates problems for a lot of people, especially when they're doing other tasks like building the walls and not devoting themselves to perhaps their businesses and their farms and whatever it was. And also taxes didn't let up, and loan payments were due despite this famine situation. And similar to life in the Great Depression, children were called upon to earn money for the family. That's what it means when it talks about now our flesh is like the flesh of our brothers, our children like their children. Yet behold, we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves, and some of our daughters are forced into bondage already. Okay. During the Great Depression, and you've probably heard your parents talk about it, maybe your grandparents. They told you life was rough. It was hard. The Depression lasted 10 or 12 years. Didn't seem like it was ever going to end. It was a terrible situation. And it wasn't uncommon for heads of household to say to their teenage sons, I can't afford for you to stay here anymore. That was not uncommon. You think, who would do that? But that's how desperate times were. And young men were sent out that were told by their fathers and mothers, we can't afford to feed you and take care of you. You're going to have to go and make your own way. And so what happened in this country was in the 30s, railroad yards were filled with young men. Young men, they were hobos. They were transients. They would just go from town to town, sneaking on into railroad cars and that kind of thing. It became quite a problem for the rail companies as well, because these young men would travel from town to town on the rails and looking for a handout or looking for a temporary job or whatever. And it got to be a real problem. And so in the 30s, Franklin Roosevelt did a wise thing. He established a lot of things, but one of the things he established was the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. It was a great idea. And the Civilian Conservation Corps established, I think it was about 14,000 camps around the country, many of them here in Arkansas. And if you want to see the remains of one, all you have to do is go to Ozone. They're just north of Ozone, just off of Highway 21. You can walk through an old CCC camp and see the remains of it. Down close to Hot Springs, you can actually tour one that's kind of been restored, so you can see what it was like. But it was a great idea. And it took all these young men from these railroad cars and railroad stations and the highways and byways, and it gave them a place to live. It was a camp, so they had a place to live. They had food, they had recreation, and they did jobs for which they were paid. So they got some respectability. They were getting paid to do a job. They weren't beggars anymore. They weren't going from town to town looking for a handout. Civilian Conservation Corps provided them with a job to work and earn money. But it was more than that, because they also were allowed to choose skills that they could learn. I had a patient who worked for the CCC, and he couldn't say enough good about it. He said it was fun being there with the other guys, and he became a heavy equipment operator. So after the war, he went out to California, worked for the state of California as a heavy equipment operator, and came back here and retired. He had a nice life that he would not have had had he not learned that skill. And people learned clerical skills, people learned bookkeeping skills. You could sign up for many things. And at the end of the week, you got paid $1 a day. You worked 6 days a week, Sundays off, and you got $1 a day. But you were only allowed to keep $1 a week. and the rest of it went back home to mom and dad and your siblings. And believe me, they were glad to get it. Those in the Civilian Conservation Corps didn't need money. Everything was provided for them. Their clothing, their tools, their room and board, and everything else, So $1 a week, that was just a little pocket money. The rest could go back home. And of course, $1 went a lot further back then. But that's an example of how it took an effort by a lot of people to remedy that situation, to make it so that families could get reunited, and so that people would not be destitute, and children did not have to be burdens for their parents and left to make their own way. And the amazing thing about that, I'm just giving you additional information. But one of the amazing things about the CCC was it was run by the military. And so these young men, and it was all young men. I'm sorry, there weren't any women, but these young men had to do things kind of the military way. They had to learn how to make a cot and how to clean up and all the things that most soldiers have to do in boot camp, so that when all of a sudden the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and we had to mobilize troops, these guys were ready, because they'd been exposed to the military. They understood things like rank and order and things. So it ended up being a brilliant idea. But it was an idea that was spawned because times got tough. It was hard. And somebody had to step forward and say, we need to change this so that people can once again begin to prosper. Well, that was kind of the situation that they were in here. And so life was tough, and everybody in the family was having to suffer as a result of this. God expects us to be good stewards. He does. He expects us to be good stewards. And he expects us also to help one another. And money problems are not exclusively related to the poor. I know people who make a pretty good income that have money problems because they just don't know how to manage it, And so, but a Christian is expected to rightfully manage the blessings that he has. My grandfather, endured the Depression. When he was 15 years old in 1925, he dropped out of school and paired with his father, my great-grandfather, and they formed a grocery business, the two of them. My grandfather was 15 years old, 1925. And after 2 years, my grandfather told me he bought out his father's part of the business because he said, my dad was not a good businessman. But that's pretty funny when you come to the conclusion that your dad's not a good businessman. You need to break up the partnership, But they parted on good terms. But I think my great-grandfather knew that he probably wasn't cut out to be a businessman. So my grandfather had his business, ran his business for 50 years. On his 65th birthday in 1975, he closed the doors and shut the building down, and the business was over. But he had a nice retirement. But the one thing that my grandfather told me, and he would sit me down and preach to me often about what to do. And there were two things he told me. One thing was, when you get money, the first thing you should do is set aside what you're going to give to the Lord. And then set aside something for the future, whatever you can afford. He said, I'm going to tell you, he told me, I'm telling you, during the Depression, that was hard to do. To set money aside when every penny counted back in those days. But he said, I did it. I never failed to do it. And I can honestly say that in the 50 plus years that Tina and I have been married, we've never failed to make a church contribution. Because we do that. We earmark that. And I think God expects that of us. God expects us to manage what we have. But sometimes managing what you have gets very difficult because times get hard. And there's no doubt that the people of Judah and Jerusalem we're experiencing hard times. And how many times has God done this? I was just reading casually through the book of Judges this week, and I read in there about how God, as Joshua and the leaders that followed Joshua, the judges that followed Joshua, when they failed to wipe out a Canaanite tribe, whether it was a Jebusite or a Hivite or a Hittite or an Ammonite or whatever, any of those Canaanite tribes, the Bible says that God allowed those people to stay, those foreigners to stay. And one of the reasons that God allowed them to stay was to test his people, to test their faith in him, and to test their ability to reject the gods of those people. And so there are times I think that God allows situations for us to test us, to make us stronger, to make us better. And those who experienced the Great Depression, I can't think of one of them who ever told me that they didn't learn some lessons from it. They valued things. They valued family. They valued a job. They valued the ability to survive in hard times. I think I've experienced hard times, but I don't think, compared to other people in the world, I don't guess I really have. But these were hard times. These were hard times for the people of Judah and Jerusalem, and it was causing the work to slump. All right, so I mentioned before, FDR did something about it. So obviously, who are you thinking is going to do something about it in this story? Nehemiah. Yeah, okay. So let's see what goes on. Nehemiah 5:6. Then I was very angry when I had heard their outcry in these words. This ticked him off. What ticked him off? Their outcry that things are hard and tough, and we can't even get food without selling ourselves and selling our possessions and so forth. And these words, they're outcrying these words. So we're going to find out what really is the source of his anger, but he's mad. What's happening? Okay. So Nehemiah expressed his anger over the situation. It angered him. Money problems had led to the loss of unity among the people, and the work had stopped. So Nehemiah was likely frustrated because here's what he had seen. He had seen exactly what we saw last week. He had seen the people stand so strong against an enemy, but fall so quickly because of monetary problems. They stood up to Sanballat and Tobiah and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites and all those who were trying to get them to stop the work. They stood up to them even when their lives were endangered by them. They stood up to them. But here, this problem of destitution and the famine and not having money, families being affected, that was a problem from within that was causing some devastation. So let's look at the next few verses. I love this. I consulted with myself. Does that mean Nehemiah talked to himself? Probably. Anybody in here who says they never talked to themselves is lying. What? I was thinking in my mind, as if there's another way to think. So, some people think out loud. Some people move their lips when they read. But some people, I talk to myself. Mostly I scold myself. I scolded myself today on the golf course. You idiot! What were you thinking? And I said it out loud. But he consulted with himself, and what do you think that means? I consulted with myself.
Some of the other translations just say, carefully considered the situation.
Carefully
He
considered.
thought it out.
What did the last verse say? He became what? Angry. Now, what happens when we become angry sometimes? We lash out.
And then you go for help with someone
That's what you should do. Yes.
Versus counseling with himself.
Yeah, that's what he did. He counseled with himself.
Yeah.
But instead of a knee-jerk reaction, angry and started throwing things and getting upset, no. First, I think he kind of calmed down and cooled off a little bit is what I think. So anyway.
One translation says, after seriously considering the matter.
After seriously considering the matter, yes.
So it's the same thing, he didn't go.
In solitude, though. He
Right.
was in solitude.
Spent some time.
And the way, what we know from Nehemiah, I would not be surprised if there was some prayer involved in that too. But it says, and I contended with the nobles and the rulers and said to them, you are exacting usury, each from his brother. Therefore I had a great assembly against them. I said to them, we, according to our ability, have redeemed our Jewish brothers who were sold to the nations. Now, would you even sell your brothers that they may be sold to us? Then they were silent and could not find a word to say. Again, I said, the thing which you are doing is not good. Should you not walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the nations, our enemies? And likewise, I, my brothers, and my servants are lending them money and grain. Please, let us leave off this usury. Please give back to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive groves, their houses, also the 100th part of the money of the grain, the new wine, and the oil that you are extracting from them. So again, before doing anything, Nehemiah was wise enough to just cool off and calm down. Usury. You saw that word in there. Usury, an absorbent amount or rate of interest, especially in excess of the legal rate. When I graduated from dental school, my intention was to set up a practice in Little Rock. And I found some office space, and I even signed the lease for the office space. And then I talked to a contractor about renovating the office space to suit my needs. And then I talked to a dental equipment company about coming in and providing my equipment. But I had a problem. And the problem was the usury laws in Arkansas at the time. It was early 1979, and times were rough. We had a few years of double-digit inflation. Right now, our inflation rate is like, what, 3.4% or something, and everybody's raising Cain about it. Well, this was double-digit inflation back then. And Arkansas had a law that called the usury law. I don't know if it's still in existence or not. I don't know. It's been nearly 50 years, so I don't know. But the usury laws in Arkansas at the time said that banks and automobile dealerships and all that maxed out at 10%. All you could charge was 10% interest. Okay. And that's a lot. But the problem is Arkansas banks couldn't find money to loan at 10%. So you had to go out of state to get a loan, and I ended up buying my dental equipment at 18% interest. 18% interest. Figure out what your car payment would be at 18% interest sometime, or what your house payment would be. That was awful.
In the 30s,
yeah,
the interest rate was
22% in the 30s. Yeah, so basically under the same circumstances, there just wasn't money available, And so I said, I can't afford to do this. I put paper to pencil, and I said, this is what I'm going to have to earn every month to pay the rent, to pay off my debt to the contractor, to pay off my dental equipment, and I can't do it. And I went to the guy I had signed the lease on, and I said, you can hold me to it. I've signed it. I'm indebted to you. And I explained to him, if you continue to force me into this lease, we're both going to lose out, because I can't make it, and then you're going to be stuck, and I don't have any assets. I'm just starting out. And he was very nice. He was kind enough to say, I understand. I totally understand. I'm going to let you off the hook here. And that was nice. Still, I was glad when 5 or 6 years went by and the statute of limitations had expired, because I always worried that he might come after me after all. So we were up here visiting Tina's parents one weekend, and I heard that the building where my office ended up being for 41 years was soon to be available. And I went to the widow of the medical doctor who built the building, and I asked her, I said, how much would your rent be? She said, oh, I'll rent it to you for $200 a month. Well, I was going to pay like $2,500 a month, more like, so in a year's time, I was paying less than what 1 month would have cost me. So it was kind of a no-brainer, and that's how Mark ended up in Clarksville. So yeah, but anyway, but I was subjected to these problems with usury. People, charging exorbitant sums of money for interest. Okay, now Nehemiah was not a coward. Okay, and as a good leader, and what I mean was he was not a coward. He was not afraid to confront somebody about this. Okay, sometimes we don't like confrontation. But we don't like it. We shy away from it. It's hard to do sometimes. But Nehemiah was the type of leader who was not afraid to do it and was willing to do it and knew he needed to do it. Okay, so he took control like FDR did with the Civilian Conservation Corps. He took control at the outset of the problem. And we get a little history here in the verse that we just read, because when Judah was conquered by the Babylonians, many Jews were sold into slavery when they were taken into captivity. They were taken on as indentured servants. They had to work out their freedom. Okay, and as other Jews who went into exile in Babylon and Persia began to prosper there, it became customary for the Jews to buy their own people back from the Babylonians and the Persians, to buy their freedom back for them, which is a very kind thing to do. But there was quite a concerted effort to do that, so that the Jews would not be forever indebted to the foreigners. They could be independent and autonomous. So Nehemiah condemns these leaders that he's talking to for selling their own countrymen into slavery. He said, now you're doing to your own people what the foreigners had done to your forefathers. In other words, people were so destitute and so in need of food and necessities that they were selling their property to other Jews who were taking their property and charging them exorbitant rates of interest, usury, to take care of it for a while or whatever. The same thing happened in the Great Depression, and I'm not going to mention any names, but it happened here in this area during the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, as you know, you've probably seen the movie The Grapes of Wrath. You know that farmers had to foreclose on their property. They could not, especially with the Dust Bowl and everything else that happened, that people could not make a living. And so banks foreclosed on people's property. If they weren't making their payments, they'd come. That's what caused everybody to run off to California, where there might be some jobs and things, And there were people right here in town who prospered as a result of that. They bought up they had the money, so they bought up property that sometimes had been in people's families for generations, and they also bought up with it mineral rights. And so when that same property began to yield natural gas and things of this nature, those poor people who had to give up their property just to eat and scrape by, they didn't have that anymore. The wealthy people who bought the property did, and they just got wealthier and wealthier. And it created some resentment, and not just here in Clarksville, but it did here in Clarksville, because there was a resentment among the people who had lost everything And now this guy has the stuff that used to be theirs, and he's making a whole lot of money off of it, money that they felt should be theirs. You can understand how the anger that would result from that. And so here's the deal. It's not wrong to exact interest. That's okay. There's nowhere in the Bible does it say that you can't exact interest from somebody. Think about Jesus' parable with the talents. Remember? He gave what? One man 1, one man 5, one man 10. And he said, now go, invest this. And 2 of them did, and the other one didn't. And the other one was condemned because he didn't. So there's nothing wrong with exacting interest, but not for necessities, not for things that people need to live, not for basic needs like food and housing. Nehemiah made it pretty plain that you just don't do that to your brothers, okay? You just don't do that. Now,
Mark?
Yeah.
I'm even debating whether to make this comment.
Go ahead.
But I don't sound like I'm correcting you, but
No, go ahead. I don't mind
Under the
being
law of
corrected.
Moses, the law of Moses said you could not charge usury to your brother.
To your brother, yeah.
To your brother.
Yeah.
Now, they could charge it to foreigners.
Foreigners, okay.
But that's why, I think that's what we're seeing. But what's interesting to me is what I'm wondering about, and we've seen this in other situations throughout their history where the law of Moses just kind of got thrown out the window. And this is a case where that's
Yeah,
happened.
when I was saying it's not wrong to exact interest,
Right.
I was making kind of a 21st century
Right, a general,
application.
right, a general account, but actually for them it was wrong.
Yeah.
To do that to one another. In fact, and I, to not get too far ahead of
Yeah.
you, but that's what Nehemiah's going to say. Don't charge, they're your brothers. Don't charge them any interest.
Right.
Isn't that right?
Yeah.
That's what he's going to say.
Yeah.
So-
Oh, he's going to go. He's
Yeah.
going to go even further than
but
that.
I mean,
Yeah.
but what's
Yeah.
interesting to me is it's almost, he doesn't even mention the law here.
No, no,
And
no.
like I said, it's almost like, and we've seen it before, like in the story
It's
of
almost like common decency.
Josiah and other, where the law of Moses has just been completely forgotten.
Right.
And that may be what we're seeing here.
Maybe. But and you're right, he doesn't bring up what Moses said, but he does almost imply that there's some indecency about doing that. He says, but that's what the foreigners did to you, and you're doing it to each other. That's terrible,
And some
And so-
people think it's because it was a agricultural economy.
Yeah.
And when people did need to borrow money, it was because the crops didn't do
Right.
well or whatever, and they were in a bad bind.
Right.
And the law of Moses said, don't charge usury to your brother.
Yeah.
And instead be generous.
Right.
So
So
we're seeing opposite here.
to properly set things right, according to Nehemiah, he not only told them to stop doing it, he said, I want you to return what you've taken from them. Things that you've taken from them, you give it back. Money creates a real problem with people. And, most of us here were involved with the problems that happened at Clarksville Church of Christ 25 years ago when, someone was,
25 years.
was it 30 years ago?
I don't know.
I believe it was at least 25 years ago. But,
That's unbelievable.
when I know it's hard to believe that a quarter of a century has gone by. But and listen, none of us condoned what that person did. None of us did. None of us said that what was done was okay and right. None of us said that. In fact, we said just the opposite. What that person did was wrong. It was wrong. It was a sin. And that person needed to be confronted for that sin. But I firmly believe that if that person's sin had not involved money, we would have seen an entirely different response about it. If that person's sin had been an illicit extramarital affair, that person would have been confronted about it, but much more lovingly and much more forgivingly.
And it would have been pretty much long forgotten.
And long
My
forgotten.
opinion.
Yeah, and probably long forgotten. But you put money in there, And for some reason, it just makes people get greedy. And it,
Always one that thinks money is more important than anything.
he said, there's always one that thinks that money's more important than anything else, but I think there's more than
Yeah,
one.
sometimes there's one.
But, go ahead.
I've said this many times since then. But one thing I learned about human nature rather, is if you want to know someone's true character, see their attitude toward money.
Toward money.
Especially if they think if there's someone is
Doing them
if
wrong.
they feel like they've been cheated
Yeah.
or whatever word you want to use. And you know, I'll go to my grave thinking we saw that play out exactly.
Yeah.
Just like I agree with 100%. If it had been some other sin, you know, that's why I said it'd been long forgotten.
Right. And it's a shame, but that's the ugliness of it. And it was ugly here. It was ugly here, and that's what made Nehemiah mad, was because it was ugly. What his brothers were doing to one another. Okay. So to properly set things right, he told the leaders to return what they had taken. So let's see what their response is. And this is just my symbol for usury. They're just people out there who are just, they want what you have, and they're going to do whatever it takes to get what you have. There are people like that. I got a call this week, and it said spam risk, and I should have not answered it. Don't ever do that if it says spam risk, but it said spam risk, and I answered it, and this voice said, well, I didn't answer it. That's right. I didn't answer it. They left a voicemail. So when the voicemail concluded, I listened to the voicemail, and it said, hello, this is so-and-so from Walmart. And I need to talk to you about a contested purchase. And so I thought, Walmart? Maybe they meant Walmart, you know. And I thought, is somebody trying on my Walmart account to purchase some unauthorized thing? So obviously I decided to check it out. So I called back and say, no, this is Walmart. I hear that again. Well, I'm just calling, I got this message. Oh, okay. And it said, you know, there was an unauthorized purchase on my account. And she said, okay, could I have your first and last name? And I knew where this was going.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, no, you can't. Because I knew the next thing was going to be your address, the next thing was going to be your social security number, the next thing was going to be your age and birthday. So I said, no, hung up. But that's just an example of people who are out to get you, looking for that opportune moment to take advantage of you, you know. And I'm telling you, I'm gonna be brutally honest with you. This is not the kind of guy you want to hang around with. This is a guy who's looking to take advantage of you, you know. And I'm going to tell you, in my profession, they're out there. In my former profession, they're out there, and it makes me as mad as Nehemiah. But they're out there. It ticks me off. And Tina knows how I feel about it. And I felt that way for a long time. But I just hate to see people victimized by somebody because they're just trying to get rich off of them. And that's just annoying to me. And, you know,
And they're getting sneakier.
and they're getting sneakier and sneakier. They really are getting sneakier and
One-
sneakier about it.
One that I'm seeing lately, and maybe it's been going on for a while, but you'll get a text and it'll say, this is the post office.
Oh, yeah.
We have a
We have a package.
package that couldn't be delivered.
Yeah.
You need to call us.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and my dad's got them, and he was getting ready to act
yeah.
good. And he said, well, I wonder what that is. I said, I wonder what that package is. I said, it's a package full of cheaters. That's what it is. I said, don't you dare call that. You delete that so you're not tempted to call back or whatever, you know. Or, you know, I've heard of, I don't know what this is, I
Yeah.
shouldn't even start this.
Yeah.
But, or, you know, following a natural disaster, you know, claim that they'll fix the roof. Well,
Yeah.
you need a big deposit
Yeah.
to buy the material, then
Yeah.
you don't see them
I
again.
know.
Or fix your driveway,
Yeah.
repave your driveway,
And-
you know.
There are scams.
Just had one.
Do what?
Did you?
I just had one of those guys wanting to resurface.
Oh, yeah.
driveway, yeah.
They always need a big deposit.
Yeah.
My mom gets one. I'm here to talk to you
I
about
knew
your
it shouldn't
car
have started.
accident.
No, that's okay. Yeah, about your car.
She's never been in
Yeah,
a car
yeah,
accident.
yeah. But you know, you do that enough, you're gonna strike gold with somebody who's had a car accident, you know, so.
And it's a
They don't
numbers
know
game. If they
crazy.
make,
Yeah, it's a numbers game,
if they make
yeah.
1,000 calls, they
Yeah.
know that they're gonna,
Yeah.
you know, that, 6 or 8 of them are gonna fall for it, whatever.
Well, you know, partly because of where we lived, but for years I was a Medicaid provider. I don't know that there is a Medicaid provider around here anymore. But I was a Medicaid provider. I did children's Medicaid, I did adult Medicaid, I did it all. And I did everything. I didn't restrict the kind of procedures. I did whatever procedures Medicaid would pay for. And I had people that would come from 100 miles away because I was the only dentist around who would do a Medicaid denture for an adult or whatever. And I didn't make any money at it. I didn't make any money at all. Sometimes I lost money at it. But I was willing to do it. I felt like there was somewhat of an obligation to do that, you know. Well, we're having problems now. We're having problems in our profession because Medicaid providers are just drying up. Nobody wants to do it anymore. And now we have children all over the state who can't get dental services, you know, the rudimentary services and things. And elderly people on Medicare, on adult Medicaid, you know, can't get services. And so they're really trying hard to fix it. And one of the things they're trying to do to fix it is to try to up the reimbursement rate, get Medicaid to pay more for these dental procedures, and so hoping that more dentists will do it for more money. I'm on the executive council of the Arkansas State Dental Association, and we met last month in Hot Springs, and another member of the executive council is a guy who practices. He's got some highfalutin practice up in Springdale, up in Bentonville, and we're talking about this kind of. He can't relate to what we're talking about with Medicaid, because he's never accepted Medicaid. In fact, he doesn't even take people's insurance. He will not honor your insurance. Basically, what he says is, you come to see me, you're paying for it out of your pocket. I'm that good. I'm not going to be monitored by any insurance company or anything like that. You know? And I think that's just such a haughty attitude.
Or take the reduced rate, right?
What's that?
A reduced rate for your services. Isn't that how insurance works?
Yeah,
based
yeah,
on our Medicare?
yeah. They have a usual, reasonable, and
Right,
customary fee
right.
that you can't exceed. And he says, I don't want that, so
Yeah,
I'm
you're
not
not
going to
gonna
accept
accept
because
that.
I want to charge what I want to charge, and you're going to pay what I charge. And I just lost all my respect for that guy. You know, he and I'd actually been pretty good friends, but I'm not a friend much anymore. I think that's a terrible thing. That's taking advantage of people's situations, and that's just not right. And it's especially not right in this situation when they were doing it to their own brothers and sisters. That's all. So be careful. Okay, and this is the greatest thing. Look at their response. Then they said, we will give it back and will require nothing from them. We will do exactly as you say. So how powerful. So I called the priests and took an oath from them that they would do according to this promise. And listen, this is the greatest part. I also shook out the front of my garment and said, can you picture him in front of these guys? He stands up, he starts shaking off the front of his garment, but he's doing it to prove a point. He said, I started shaking out from her, and I said, thus may God shake out every man from his house and from his possessions who does not fulfill this promise. Even thus may he be shaken out and emptied. And all the assembly said, amen. And they praised the Lord. Then the people did according to the promise. That's just so beautiful. The influence that he had on those men. That they, in unity, they all said, we'll do it. We'll give them their stuff back. And when you can get a refund, they're not... Some stores are pretty good about giving you a refund. Other stores give you a refund like this. Yeah, we'll give you this voucher that'll be good for something of equal value.
Minus free stuff.
minus restocking fees, whatever, you know, they gotta be sure. But that's not what these people did. These people gladly returned everything. So, this is Nehemiah shaking off his garment in front of them. And it wasn't, we have many instances like this in the Old Testament where people will do things in a very showy way to prove their point, to make a point that leaves an indelible mark. And basically this is, it's almost a curse. He says, if you don't do what you say you're going to do, then I'm asking the Lord to shake you out from the assembly. In fact, shake all of your possessions away from you and everything else and leave you destitute. But first he called the priest and had him make an oath in the presence of the priest.
He didn't trust them without an oath.
Yeah, he didn't trust me. Yeah. So he asked for an oath. Well, what happened speaks well of Nehemiah. And it also, I think it speaks well of the teachable spirit of the assembled leaders, especially considering that money was involved, like I talked before. And because of Nehemiah's insistence of a public oath, he assured accountability. Because when they said, we're going to do this, the first thing, okay, I'm going to get the priest in here, I'm going to make you guys take an oath for that. Any of you ever testified in court? I have. You have to take an oath. You have to take an oath, and tell the truth. And if you break for lunch and come back, the judge usually starts by saying, I'll remind you that you're under oath. That's a big deal. That's an important part of the proceeding, is to make a pledge that you're going to tell the truth. When the governor appointed me to serve on the Arkansas State Dental Board, a judge came to my office and he made me take an oath. And I had to, he raised his hand, I raised my hand, there we were in my waiting room of my office. I was taking this oath to serve. And the oath was basically, I was taking an oath to abide by the rules of the Dental Practice Act and I pledged to protect the public. That was what that oath was, to protect the public. And in all my decisions regarding disciplining dentists and dental hygienists, it was in the name of protecting the public. Okay. Now, and that was many years ago. That I did that. And since then, I've been now I did my term on the state dental board, and then after that, I worked for a testing agency out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I even served as president of the testing agency for a couple of years. And for many years, I traveled around, I even went as far as Alaska, but I traveled around to different states' dental boards. And what I told them was, my message to all of them was, here is our test that we do to test minimal competency for dentists and dental hygienists. If we're telling you that if a candidate passes our exam, that we affirm that that person, that man or woman, has minimal competency enough to be trusted with a license in your state. And I always said this to every one of them. I said, every one of our examiners in our agency is either a current or former member of their state's dental board. So, and I would say this every time, so every one of us who examine these candidates have taken the pledge, taken the oath to protect the public. And that gave me some accountability, because those people that I was speaking to, they too had taken their oath to protect the public for their individual state boards. But that oath gave me some accountability. The fact that I could say, this is how serious I am about it. We're not going to put somebody out there with a license that we don't think is capable of doing the job. And you can bank on it, because we've taken the oath to do that. Do you see? And so that's the important thing about this oath. He wasn't trying to ridicule these men at all. He was just trying to get them to be accountable for what they were agreeing to do. So, and sometimes we need accountability sometimes to do what's right. We need to be able to say, I know I promised to do that, I'm going to do it. we all make promises we break, you know. But sometimes we just need to buckle down and say, I'm going to keep this one. I promise I'm going to keep this one. Okay. Then he goes on. And this gets kind of funny in some ways, but let's see what he says. He says, moreover, from the day I was appointed to be their governor in the land, from that day I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah. From the 20th year to the 32nd year of King Artaxerxes. For 12 years, neither I nor my kinsmen have eaten the governor's food allowance. But the former governors who were before me laid burdens on the people and took from them bread and wine, besides 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants domineered the people. But I did not do so because of the fear of God. I also applied myself to the work on this wall. We did not buy any land, and all my servants were gathered there for the work. When he says we didn't buy any land, I think we didn't do what the others did about buying people's property and charging interest for them. So Nehemiah was an honorable man. And he chose to live in a way that could not be ridiculed, okay? And he did the things that he did, not because he wanted to look good to the people, but because of his fear of God. I did these things. That's why he goes on and on about the things he did. I didn't eat the governor's food allowance. Governors before me laid burdens on the people. You know, took bread and wine from them and even charged them 40 shekels of silver in taxes. I didn't do that because of the fear of the Lord, because of the fear of God. And I think that's why the people saw in him a man of God. Let me get to the next verse. Moreover, there were at my table 150 Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were around us. Now, that which was prepared for each day was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep. Also birds were prepared for me. 150 people, 1 ox and 6 sheep every day. That's not a whole lot for 150 people if you think about it, okay? But that's how many people he was feeding on a daily basis. And once in 10 days, all sorts of wines were furnished in abundance. Yet for all this, I did not demand the governor's food allowance because the servitude was heavy on this people. So he's kind of patting himself on the back, it sounds like. But he's talking about all the good things he did, what a good leader he was, okay? Nehemiah not only did not take what he could have in the governor's allowance, but he gave when he didn't have to. He shared freely. 150 Jews and even people from other countries. He let them eat of his provisions. Okay.
That was in addition
All of his servants.
came to us from the surrounding
Yeah.
nations.
So
Could have been
very generous, extremely generous, and as a good and godly leader, he never expected more of his followers than he expected of himself. He was keenly aware of the plight of those around him. Jimmy Carter turned 100 years old last week. I think much more of Jimmy Carter as an ex-president than as a president. The office of presidency was almost more than he could handle. But his life after the presidency has just been incredible. And you think of all the things that he's done that he didn't have to do. You know, he built countless houses with Habitat for Humanity. Working, I'm not talking about just going like a lot of politicians do to be seen at those scenes. You saw him carrying a hammer and a saw and everything else and doing the work. And he taught a Bible class every Sunday morning at his church in Plains, Georgia. He was a man who, despite having been the most powerful man in the world, did not let all that go to his head, you know. And I just can't tell you how much I respect that, you know, because so many, when given that kind of authority, get so lofty-headed. I remember this happened about 35 years ago. Queen Elizabeth, and I've got nothing against Queen Elizabeth, but Queen Elizabeth came to the United States for a visit, and as is typical when this happens, that they do these photo op things, you know, and everything. So she goes with some representatives of our government to one of these Habitat for Humanity houses, okay? And this lady has just moved into this house. And she's an elderly woman, and she's quite rotund, okay? And this is the first house she's ever owned. And when Queen Elizabeth walks in her door, she is so excited. She runs up to Queen Elizabeth and she gives her a bear hug and she lifts her off the ground, okay? And you can hear everybody go, "Huh?" And even Queen Elizabeth is like this. And then on the news that night, they start tearing into this woman, saying, did she not know that that's the Queen of Great Britain? You don't do that to the Queen of Great Britain. Somebody needed to teach her proper etiquette. And I was angry. I said, no, that's her house. That's her house. That's not her queen, okay? That's her house. If she wanted to do that to a guest in her house, she had every right to do that, you know. And I just don't like uppity things. And I thought that was just really uppity, you know. And that's why I really like the fact that even though Nehemiah could have sat back after being appointed governor, you know, and we didn't talk about that too much, but we find out that, okay, we find out he was in Judah for how long? Remember? How long was he governor? From the 25th year? 12 years. He was there for 12 years. Okay. 12 years he served as governor. Now, remember back in the first chapter or the second chapter, when King Artaxerxes said, how long are you going to be gone? Do you think he said 12 years? I don't think so. But here's what I think happened. I think somebody else took over Nehemiah's role as the cupbearer, and he was doing a pretty good job. And what King Artaxerxes saw happening in Judah was that Nehemiah was doing an excellent job, and things were doing well there. And he was organizing the people, and he was creating a good environment, and so he appointed him to be the governor. But rather than being the governor and saying, okay, I'm in charge here now, he becomes generous. He becomes gracious. He shares with others. He doesn't do what governors before him had done. He doesn't take advantage of his situation. He chooses to serve rather than be served. And that's what Jesus did. Jesus, he told his followers, I came to serve, not to be served. You know? And I expect the same from you. Whoever is great among you must be a servant. And that's what Nehemiah was. And look how effective it was for him. Right? Last verse. Remember me, oh my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people. Sounds kind of haughty, doesn't it? Many believe that Nehemiah's writings were actually composed as a diary and not intended to be seen or read by others. But even if they were intended to be seen by others, in his private thoughts, he asked God to be remembered for the good that he had done. And he demonstrated his reliance upon his heavenly reward and not on the praise of men. So I think it's important when we look at this last verse, he's not talking to anybody but God. He's not saying to everybody, hey, you remember all the good stuff I've done. He's talking just to God. God, please remember what I've done. Remember. He's looking forward to his heavenly reward. And his public words and his private actions basically said the same thing. So, I quit.